as in Peter, O-O-R-M-A-N, opposite of rich. I'm with the Illinois People's Action. You might recognize the t-shirt. In Fair Economy, Illinois, it's a coalition of churches, groups, and individuals from across the state committed to economic and social justice. I'll be speaking to Subpart K, Section 245.1100 of the rules that cover enforcement. When the legislature and Governor Quinn passed the Hydraulic Fracturing Regulatory Act earlier this year, they told us that it would serve as a national model for environmental safety, that the rules would be strict and tough in order to protect Illinois' environment and people. Judged on that basis, the proposed rules fall far short. Starting right at the top of that section, the proposed rules say that IDNR may suspend or revoke permits, order remediation, or issue penalties if one of the rules is broken. But the law itself requires that the construction and testing of wells must be done in line with the standards set by the American Petroleum Institute. There is no may, there is no discretion, with good reason. Without these standards, fracking wells could be in danger of blowouts, fires, or explosions that threaten workers, nearby residents, or the environment. The BP Deepwater Horizon disaster happened because these standards were not followed and not enforced. We cannot take those kinds of risks here in Illinois. These rules need to be toughened by changing the language to read that IDNR will or must suspend or revoke permits or issue penalties if the rules are broken. We need a policy closer to one strike and you're out, so that the drillers have every incentive to make sure that they're doing the job right. In a similar way, there must be tougher financial penalties for gas and oil companies when they break the rules. Let's be honest here, these companies really only care about the money that they can pull out of Illinois. That's their only purpose. And history shows that corporations will take shortcuts to increase those profits, even if people, the environment, and laws and regulations stand in the way. If we want enforcement to matter at all, we must make it more expensive to break the law than it is to follow it. We have got to punch them in the profit margin. Right now, the proposed rules do not do that. The law itself sets strict penalties that could go up to tens of thousands of dollars, but the rules have minimal fines starting at a token $50. That's less than most speeding tickets. And only go up to about $2,500. The top 5 producers of oil and gas made more than $118 billion in profits last year. These relatively paltry fines will not slow these companies down. Heck, they could pay for these penalties by laying off a couple of workers. The fines need to reflect the true cost of the damage the drillers will do to people and the environment. We must have the fines and penalties outlined in the law itself. We need strong rules, steep fines, and tough cops on the beat. As written, the proposed rules don't provide for any of those. If the IDNR wants to accomplish the aim of the law, the safety of Illinois and its people, it must make these rules stricter and more expensive. Or oil and gas companies will see them as nothing more than the cost of doing business. Thank you.
Member of IPA in Fair Economy, Illinois, and the Unitarian Church in Bloomington, which is at Stevenson's church, by the way. I'm going to deal with radioactivity, section 1-75A7, rule 245.850. There are 4 point sources for radioactivity in a frac pad. One are the drill cuttings that end up in a small drill pit, along with drilling mud. 2, the flow back and the produced water, which the U.S. Geological Service says that in Illinois runs over 1,000 picocuries per liter, and that's out of the old vertical wells. It'll be higher than the horizontal wells. That's 67 times above the EPA contamination level. Pipes and equipment. When that water comes up from underground, pressure changes, temperature changes, means that the radiant precipitates out, scales on the pipe, and you get very, very hot pipe, over 100,000 picocuries per gram. And this stuff can end up in the scrap metal market, and in the South it's ended up in playgrounds. in school bleachers. And I don't think there's a single person in this room, be they for or against this industry, that wants their children playing on radioactive pipe.
That's right.
Okay? Finally, there's wellhead gas. Given the high levels of radioactivity that has occurred in shale gas in Pennsylvania, we can be fairly confident that we're going to have elevated levels of radon-222 at the wellhead, which will only be less than a day away from Springfield, 1.4 days away from Chicago. People will go into their kitchens, turn on their stoves, and they'll be breathing radon, and we're already above a safe level in the average home in Illinois. This will simply add to an already serious public health situation in the state. Here are the rural changes that any reasonable person would arrive at. You're required to have one test date. The rules don't specify when. If you look at test results coming out of the produced water, it looks like a launch at Cape Canaveral. The results rapidly shoot up and increase rapidly through around day 14, start arching to day 21, and then they level off and then continue to increase over the next 2 months. What will a company do? They'll test day 1, minute 1. Clean results, and also meaningless. Don't even file when they're wasting paper. So what you have to do is specify after day 21. You'll have halfway decent results then. Number 2, you're required to test adjacent to pits and tanks. There's no definition of adjacent to. 6 inches, 16 inches, 6 feet, 60 feet? Are we talking the top 6 inches or 2 feet down? Recommendation, 6 inches to 12 inches, top 6 inches. Okay? Testing for radioactivity. Test for all sources at 4-point sources. For uranium-238, radium-226, radium-228, radon-222. These are the ones that account. Finally, create a traffic light system to determine when radioactivity in a well pad has entered the yellow zone. When do we have low-level radioactivity that falls under the Low-Level Radioactivity Waste Management Act in Illinois? When do we have a situation when OSHA should step in and provide worker safety? When do we have a situation when we should monitor, tag, provide manifests to pipe and equipment that is so hot it should never get into the scrap metal market? These are a few things that reasonable rules would do. You have done none of them. Thank you.
All right. My comments tonight are on storing blowback and produced water. And I just want to preface this by saying that it's hard for me to call this fluid water because there is absolutely no properties of life-sustaining elements in this water afterwards, but for the sake of this discussion, I will continue to do that. Anyway, I'm doing this specific to the open pits versus the length of time that are allowed in these open pits versus sealed storage containers. Number 1, I'll go through a list of 4 concerns and then what we feel, IPA feels is a solution. Number 1, the fracking waste is filled with all sorts of heavy metals, as we all know now, and carcinogens and radioactivity material. Any sensible or safe resolution would prevent any contact with humans, animals, and or the environment. Note that, it's not enough that we're losing so much of our water to the fracking process to begin with, but the EPA estimated that in 2011, up to 140 billion gallons of water was used in 1 year in fracking just in this nation. So besides having to use it, now we have to come up with a way to store this stuff. And so the Illinois law as it stands says that water must be stored in these pits only in emergency situations, and that be for only 7 days. And that's in the law section 1.75-75. Contrary to that, the rules drafted by IDNR subpart H section 245.830 and 245.850, there's a huge loophole there because it allows fracking companies to store this waste after completion of fracking. Okay, the law, emergency storage only, the rules, completion of fracking, which can take months to complete a frack pad site. So, granted, this fracking process is complicated, the law is complex, but it doesn't have to be further complicated by removing and not including common sense language in this law and in these rules. There are simple amendments by way of language that, if injected into the law, would make it closer to being the kind of stringent regulation that it has been touted to be. So it's sort of a play on words here. A mandate would say will be conducted. Otherwise, it's reasonably expected to be conducted. That type of play on words serves the industry. It doesn't serve the safety and health of people in Illinois. Okay. Number 4, wastewater can easily leak from these pits into the groundwater, and it can contaminate drinking water and generate toxic fumes, which it has been proven to take place in other states. We've often talked about seismic activity here tonight. I'm from Southern California. In the Yucca Valley earthquake hit, what woke me up that morning was my neighbor's pool, the water sloshing out of the pool. So I can only imagine what might happen here with open pits of this fluid. If an earthquake hits, it could slosh right out of the pit. Our solution, we believe that the drillage should be required before permits are allowed to calculate the appropriate size tanks needed for sufficient storage. And that the produced water, that we clarify that the wastewater must be removed from the pit within 7 days. We need JCAR to tighten up this law. In closing, Illinoisans, people here from all the various groups, we have really educated ourselves on this topic as citizens. We've done our job. We would like IDNR to do theirs.
Yes.
Thank you. I am Paul Rosenberger. You heard from my wife earlier. I've lived in Decatur, Illinois since 1955. I'm a graduate agricultural engineer and a retired design engineer from Canada. I was raised on a 200-acre farm in northwest Iowa that was first owned by my grandfather in 1890. My brother and I sold the farm 100 years later. And if we still owned that farm, we definitely would not want a fracking operation on it because of the potential for destruction of some of the highly productive 3-foot deep black soil that was there that is very similar to the central Illinois high-quality soil. I'm also a representative of First Presbyterian Church in Decatur as a member of Illinois People's Action, IPA, and from Fair Economy, Illinois. As a lifetime Presbyterian, I have learned that our church leaders try to make decisions in a decent and orderly fashion. In that way, I will try to comment on what seems to me to be an unfair and ambiguous public hearing process. First, the verbiage in section 245.230E of the proposed Illinois Department of Natural Resources, we've all heard it's IDNR, rules create a loophole whereby the 60-day review period for permit applications starts the clock ticking even before the application is deemed complete and accurate by the IDNR. I believe this invites fracking companies to deliberately submit incomplete permit applications as a way of avoiding public oversight and comment. IDNR, therefore, needs to ensure that the 60-day review period begins only after IDNR deems the permit applications are complete. Second, in section 245.270 in the rules, they undercut the robust public participation that was required by the statute passed by the legislature as follows. And here I will not be able to read the points that I've made. I'm going to highlight some of them. Because this particular area here really applies to the process of how the hearings are going to be held. For example, one of the rules says that it is allowed to be held out of the county in which fracking is being applied for. My theory is that if you make it easy for them to put it some distance away from that home county, I believe that you would not make it very accessible to many persons in the public.
15 seconds, sir.
Okay. So what I'm really saying is we must make the hearing process very accessible.